Howdy folks, Mr. Grimm here, coming at you with a tutorial on how to use variables in your animations. Now, it's important to note that this is specifically for animating and rendering within Blockbench as a standalone. So the method shown today will not be transferable to things like Sketchfab or Blender, things like that. It's purely for Blockbench purposes. So, that being said, you're going to want to be in the generic model workspace as well. It doesn't matter if you really have meshes or cubes. All of that is all applicable with the technique we're going to go over today. So, let's go ahead and dive right in. So right off the bat, you can see that there's a lot of stuff going on here. On the left-hand side, we've got a few animations that have some different names. Primary one with features. We've got slow walking, happy, things like that. Then on the left-hand side, on the bottom, we have variables that determine the different elements that we're going to be swapping in and out. So the sliders are really just for visualization purposes. And as you can see, when I slide one up and down, it changes what texture is displayed. So these are really just for visualization purposes. These aren't required by any means, but they can be helpful when you're going through the animation process. So let's go ahead and jump back over into edit mode, and what we see here immediately is some sort of abomination going on with his face. Now, the reason for that, I'll show you here in just a moment, is you can see we've got all these different mouth shapes and eye shapes over here in our texture viewport, right? Now, the reason these are all overlapped, as you can see over on the outliner on the right-hand side, we have a bunch of duplicates of these items, and they all exist in the same exact space. So as I click through these bone groups, go ahead and look up here where the position is, and you'll notice that these are all existing in the same exact space. So if I were to turn all the mouths off and go one by one, you can watch the viewport up here for the UVs. You can see that each of these has a different shape. Now, this is the general structure for any element that you want to interchange. This doesn't just apply to textures, this applies to entire elements, entire groups. So right now I only have one mouth or one object, one plane in this group. But you could make a group up of several objects at once. So if you had an item, let's say a good example of this would be if your character was holding an item and you wanted to switch the item that was in their hand, and that one singular item was made up of multiple elements in a group, you would be able to dynamically hide and show that by using this method. Right now we're just focusing on these three facial features to aid in some simplicity. So we'll go through a little bit of what this structure looks like, what it's doing, and then how we set it up. So like I was saying earlier, for setting this up, you need to have a parent element. As you see here, we have mouth as our parent, and then each mouth underneath that has a number. We see the same exact thing for the eye right and eye left. You have your primary parent, which has the name eye right, and then each one underneath is numbered. Now looking on the left-hand side, as I have this parent group selected, you can see that it has each of these eyes assigned a UV. And as we click through, you can see what goes to what. So personally, I like to have a little cheat sheet just written down on my desk that has a small descriptor of what each number is. So now that we see the general structure of what these facial features look like, we can really dig into the mechanics behind it. So key takeaways from the edit section is you have your parent, you have child bones or groups, and then each of those has its own dedicated UV on the UV outliner. All right, now let's jump back over to animate. And what we'll be looking at here is the variable placeholders window on the bottom left-hand side. So as you can see, I have set up variable.mouthType, variable.eyeRight, and variable.eyeLeft. Now this is essentially what you're going to be doing for each of your variables. So if you have an item in the hand that's interchangeable, or if you have body parts that are interchangeable, or clothing, etc., you'll just make a variable for it and name it accordingly. Now, what I've done here is I've created sliders for each of these, and the way that the slider is configured is in this first little section. It shows the display that's going to be in the slider itself right above. Then the first number is going to be the step rate, so that will be whether it's in a decimal or a whole number or by 2s or 3s, etc. So if you put that as 0.1, when you increase that slider, it would increase by 0.1. So it would go from 1 to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, etc. Now when we have it set as 1, it'll go 1, 2, 3 through the whole numbers, and that's what we want. The second number is going to be your starting point, so it's important to know if your variable is starting with a 0 or a 1. As we can see in my hierarchy, I have it starting as 1 for all of them. So mouth underscore 1, I right underscore 1, I left underscore 1. Then that third number is going to be the ceiling of that slider, or the maximum. And so that's just going to be however many items you have. So the last item in my hierarchy is mouth underscore 11, and then for the eyes there's 9 of those. And so you just number those accordingly. So now that we have our slider set up, what we can do is go into those parent items and ensure that they are assigned to those variables. So we're going to go ahead and open the parent group for the mouth. And as you can see in my preset animation, I have a keyframe for scale, and then on the left-hand side, I have typed out v for variable dot mouth type is equal to 2 equal signs to v dot mouth type. So it's equal to itself. Now you'll see why we did that here in just a second. So then we're going to go ahead and click through the child groups. So we'll start with mouth 1, and we'll look at this scale keyframe. You'll see it says variable.mouthType equals 1. Now if you're sort of picking up the trend here, what we're going to be doing is adding a number for each of these child groups, and it's going to be specifically for the scale. So mouth 2 will be variable.mouthType equals 2, then 3 for 3, 4 for 4, and so on. Now we're going to follow that exact same process for both of the eyes. So we'll open up the I right parent group. It'll say v.iWrite equals v.iWrite. Then we'll look at the child groups and say I right underscore 1 is variable.iWrite equals 1. And I'm sure you can guess and see where we're going with this. So on and so forth. We're doing that for I right and I left. Now once all of that is done, these sliders for the mouth type, the I right and I left, should all work. If it doesn't work, go ahead and revisit the steps. Make sure you did everything right. You have the right number of equal signs. You don't have any typos. If you do have any issues, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll try to address it when I can. But if you set everything up right, that is exactly what you should see. Now we can go ahead and create a new animation. And this can really be whatever name you'd like. We're going to go ahead and just make it a looping animation and just keep the default name animation. So immediately what you see is all of the overlapping pieces again. The reason for that is because it's showing them all at once. We need to look up at our control animation, which I have named features, and hit that little circle, and it'll switch to a play icon. What that does is it assigns all of those variables and those control variables to the items themselves. And what we're going to be doing to animate these objects is we're going to click the little button right here that looks like a magic wand. It says Animate Effects. Once you click that, a section will show up for particle, sound, and instruction keyframes. What we're looking for is this instructions keyframe. So we're going to click the plus to add a keyframe, and then on the left-hand side, we see a keyframe timeline script box. Now this script box is where we are going to be writing all of our animations for each of these parts. And so what this looks like is we write variable or v dot your identifier, so in this case we'll go mouth type equals and then the number value associated with the frame that you would like to show. For ease of use, we'll go with 1. Then what we can do, because it's a script, we can do multiple elements at one time. So if we want to change the eyes at the same time, all we have to do is a semicolon, then follow the same process. So variable dot I right equals 1, semicolon, variable dot I left equals 1. Then if you go over to your timeline and hit the play button, if it hasn't already shown by now, you should see the corresponding facial features for those numbers. And essentially, that's the entire process. It's then up to you how you would like to animate your objects. Now, in this file, I have slow walking, and as you can see from just playing it, the facial features aren't working. Now remember, you have to select the control animation, or what mine it says is features. You need to hit play on that to enable the face to animate. Because we're doing this sort of stop motion style of hiding and showing, these are going to show up as step animations where they just sort of pop in and pop out. There's not really a way to ease it unless you go manually with it. So I'll leave that up to your discretion if you'd like to have a little bit more detail in your facial features, but it can become quite a bit over time, so just please keep that in mind. And really, that's the entire process for how to animate facial features using variables in Blockbench. Now, I would recommend, if you're going to be doing any sort of heavy animation or rendering in Blockbench for this type of stylized videos or things like that, there are a couple of plugins that I highly recommend you download. The first one is going to be Cameras, which adds cameras to Blockbench. It allows you to view the model from different angles and can be animated to create camera paths. So this will create some dynamic camera movement rather than just the static camera from the viewport itself. So go ahead and dive into that. I'm not going to go into detail on that as it's relatively self-explanatory, but it is a very, very powerful plugin. The next one I recommend you install is called Scene Recorder by You and Howell. It adds a new scene recorder where you can record your model in a larger variety of formats. So this increases the number of formats. You can manually decide the resolution. You can pixelate things. It's just such a wider range of tools than the static GIF recorder that comes with Blockbench right out of the box. I will warn you, this does take a little bit of additional setup. There is a video on the plugin page, and when you first install it, it walks you through how to set the plugin up. You do have to do some external downloading, so just keep that in mind. It's not as simple as pressing install and using it right away. There's a little bit that has to go into it, but it is well worth it. The renders and the video recordings that come out of that are so much better than the default video, and it really just steps it up a notch. So with that, I am going to wrap this video up. Feel free to drop a question if you have them. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Discord. All my information's in my bio. I'm also relatively active in the Blockbench Discord server. Go definitely check that out. There's a wealth of information there. I'm excited to see what you guys produce from this. Alrighty, we'll see you in the next video.